Welcome to the Connect with TrueSight webinar series. During today's webinar, you're able to ask questions of our panelists. The questions, as well as the webinar recording, will be posted a week from today's presentation. Today is TSOM extending value with the Patrol for Oracle Enterprise KM, and Manuel Sarmiento will take us through this content. Over to you, Manuel.
Thank you, Greg. Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending this webinar. I am Manuel Sarmiento, a Senior Technical Support Analyst, and I have been working in BMC for almost 15 years, always in customer support and most of the time supporting Patrol KMs and Express solutions, especially in the application monitoring area. In this webinar, we will present the new Patrol for Oracle Enterprise Database Monitoring solution. We will be looking at an overview of the product and the architecture. We would like to explain why BMC recommend using this new solution and what are the advantages and benefits, especially comparing it against the old Patrol for Oracle solution. We will cover the self-monitoring attributes this solution offers and self-troubleshooting capabilities the same attributes provide. Also, we will show a demo for a standalone instance configuration. As mentioned, this is our new monitoring solution for Oracle databases. And what is a monitoring solution? A monitoring solution is a predefined set of metrics that monitor the health and performance of a specific device or service. BMC monitoring solutions are composed of monitor types and attributes. Patrol for Oracle Enterprise Database provides a detailed view of the Oracle database activity over time, so that you can detect problems, optimize systems, analyze trends, plan capacity, and manage multiple hosts simultaneously. Patrol for Oracle Enterprise Database enables you to monitor and manage the availability and performance of resources of an Oracle environment. It provides visual warnings and alarms when thresholds are exceeded and allows an easy identification of the problem. The monitoring tool is designed for remote monitoring using certified JDBC connector provided by Oracle. The KM provides full support for TrueSight components. Old Patrol consoles are no longer supported. Also provides availability metrics for different Oracle architectures like rack and DataGuard, and some performance metrics for certain areas such as space management, buffers, and sessions. After you configure an Oracle database environment, the KM automatically discovers all the logical and physical components of the Oracle database. The KM gives you the flexibility to monitor the Oracle database depending on the environment. It also allows you to monitor the health of an Oracle database. You can enable the following components or categories while configuring a database. The Oracle Operating System Usage Monitor category determines the operating system utilization statistics and system resources like CPU wait time and CPU busy time. Table Spaces category monitor the space available and the space used by table spaces in megas and percent. The Sessions monitor sessions and user activity in the database, like user active sessions. Undo Usage category monitor undo blocks and undo space usage in the database, like expired and active blocks. The Services determines the Oracle services executed in the database, like database service calls per second, or total amount of users calls per second. The Pluggable Database category monitor the mode, size, status, and user sessions of the pluggable database. The Pluggable Table Space monitor the space available and the space used by pluggable table spaces. The Users Monitoring category determines the user's activity in the Oracle instance, like the current number of logons. The system category monitors the system performance, logical and physical, of the database. Some KPIs are buffer cache hit ratio, which is the current ratio as a percentage of buffer cache hits versus total request. Also the database wait time ratio. Jobs category monitor the jobs in the database, like active and failed jobs. The custom query monitor the configure SQL query details like query response time. The standby health category monitor all the standby data guard instances. As a KPIs, you can find apply lag and transport lag. The listeners category monitor the listener's status and the listener's response time. The wait events monitor the wait time and wait count of the database, like wait count attribute, which indicates the number of times waited. The ASM category monitor the ASM disk performance of the database. Most important KPIs are write and read requests. The fast recovery area usage monitoring category monitors the disk usage in the Oracle database, like percentage of disk space used by fast recovery area. Now, let's see the architecture. As mentioned, this KM is designed for remote monitoring using a certified JDBC connector provided by Oracle. In the old Oracle KM, it was required to install some scripts and libraries, called the remote monitoring package, in the remote servers, and also you had to install SQL Plus Oracle client in the Patrol agent machine. Then, to configure the monitoring, some extra steps were needed, like registering the remote host in the KM configuration. Bottom line, the configuration was not that easy, and customers were facing many issues. In addition, there were some limitations, like you could not monitor RAC, ASM, and DataGuard remote instances. In the other side, in this new KM, as you can see in the architecture, basically there is no difference between local and remote, as in both cases we use the seed or service name defined in the tnsnames.ora file. In local monitoring, Patrol for Oracle Enterprise Database starts a Java process. This Java process runs local queries from an Oracle database to produce a list of instances and databases. For remote monitoring, the Java process identifies where the remote server is running. Based on the operating system, the Java process creates a remote client connection. For Unix, the remote connection is an SSH channel. For Windows, the remote client connection is an SSH or WMI channel. The same process logic applies for local monitoring. In the first inventory poll, the Java process discovers the Oracle system, databases and table spaces, and creates the discovery tree for Patrol. After the discovery is complete, the Java collector starts collecting availability for the Oracle instances, databases, and partitions. The default availability poll cycle is 1 minute. The Java process also starts to collect data performance, with a 5-minute poll interval. All of the poll cycles are configurable. Now that you know more about the new solution, here is the key question. Why to use the new Oracle Enterprise KM? If you are familiar with the old Patrol for Oracle solution, you will see the benefits of using the new Oracle Enterprise KM. Among some other benefits and advantages, the most important are the simplified configuration. You need to provide basic configuration details, like the host name, seed or service name, and monitoring user. This KM, unlike the old Oracle KM, does not create the monitoring user. It is up to the customers to create the monitoring user and provide the required permissions. Security-wise, this has been improved, as there is a minimal required permission to be assigned, and for each monitoring category, you can assign or not the required permissions depending on your monitoring needs. In addition, there is no longer permissions needed on operative system user, and sys user is no longer required. In addition, this KM does not create any Oracle objects in the user schema, neither does any kind of manipulation on the database like the older Oracle KM. Once it is configured, the KM automatically discovers the instance and the selected categories to be monitored, which are selected with a simple checkbox within the policy. The KM uses an Oracle JDBC connector, certified and provided by Oracle. For those of you familiar with the old Oracle KM, SQL Plus was used to connect to the instance and collect data. This change makes the new KM more reliable and allows us to improve query execution, having better performance and accuracy. It has also a clear hierarchy view. You can use a logical environment name to have different business-related hierarchy tree, for example, QA and production environments. Each environment has its own Java backend collector, so you will not want to share the same Java process for QA and production databases. As a best practice, we recommend to isolate production databases within the same environment and use the Java backend collector for only those production databases. You can also separate the environments based on monitoring needs, as the monitoring categories are set at the environment level and not at the instance level. For example, if you have pluggable and non-pluggable databases, you will create an environment for pluggable databases where pluggable category is selected, and another environment where pluggable is not selected, and the same applies for any category. We will see this more clear in the demo within this webinar. Let's move to the troubleshooting section and see which are the self-monitoring attributes, how you can validate the configuration, find the problems, and fix them. The self-monitoring attributes will provide positive and negative feedback. When the configuration is correct, you will get positive annotation and the confirmation it was correct, like Java process started. And when there is an issue, you will get a negative annotation message pointing to the possible causes and corrective actions. You can find the attributes at different levels in the Discover hierarchy tree depending on the nature of the problem. If the structure is completed, you will look at the instance status and instance configuration status under the instance monitor. If no instance is discovered, you will look at the configuration status and monitoring status attributes under the environment monitor. And if only root container exists, you will look at the configuration status attribute under the Oracle monitor. Let's get more deep on this with some examples. If the structure is completed, you will see under the Oracle host all the instances configured with the selected categories at the environment level. Instance status will report any problem related to the connection settings to the Oracle instance, like wrong host or username, and also will report the availability of the instance, whether it is up or down. But from KM perspective, if it cannot connect, the instance is not available. So instance status will report a problem, or the instance not available. Instance configuration status will report any permission error to monitor any of the selected categories at a specific instance. That is why this metric is at the instance level and not at the environment level. If you have many instances under the same host and only in one of them permission to monitor jobs may be missing, or if pluggable category is selected and the database is not pluggable, you will get the annotation on this attribute. With this in mind, you will know what you have to fix and where, as you can see in this slide. When the environment container is created, configuration status reports any issue with the Java backend collector. As the Java process, it is very important, it has its own attribute. Monitoring status reports configuration errors that are impacting all the configure instances that are set at the environment level. The reason why the Java process is so important and basically has its own parameter is because if you configure an environment for your production databases, if the Java backend collector fails, you will lose monitoring for all your production databases. So this is a key piece of the monitoring functionality. The configuration status will have a positive annotation, like every time the Java process starts, and will report any problem in the Java settings like wrong Java path or unsupported Java version. Also, if the process cannot start, will report possible causes and corrective actions. As mentioned, monitoring status reports configuration errors that are impacting all the configure instances at the environment level. Like if you don't configure any instance under the environment, you get a message about it, or if you use an invalid regis for table spaces filtering. Here, you can see where and what to fix, in case configuration status and monitoring status reports a problem. And last but not least, configuration status attribute under the root container. We expect this attribute being barely used as is only for processing the CMA configuration internally in patrol. Any problem on pushing the configuration to patrol will be reported here, also if you configure the same instance twice. Just a quick note you need to be aware, when checking for self-monitoring parameters and you start looking at the hierarchy tree, you must know if the device mapping is enabled or not. If the device mapping is enabled, which is by default, all configured hosts under an environment will appear as a device in the device list. So you will have to look for each host in the device list to check instance level attributes like instance status. For environment level and root container attributes, those will appear under the patrol agent named device. You will see this in the following demo. In this demo, I would like to cover some important information to help you with implementation of the KM, show you the standalone database configuration, and check some of the self-monitoring attributes we have mentioned previously. Let's go to the documentation first. First place you will go is the planning section. Here is the system requirements where you can see the patrol products and Oracle databases supported versions. Also, you can see the JDBC driver currently used by the KM and its location. In the supported operating systems list, you can see only Windows and Linux. It may look like a short list of supported operating systems, and this is of course true. But as mentioned in this webinar, this KM was designed for remote monitoring, so the supported operating systems where you install the patrol agent and the KM is not that relevant. From any Windows or Linux machine, you can monitor remotely your databases running on any OS, no matter if it is Solaris or AIX. There is not any limitation. For example, you will be able to monitor the databases running on Linux or Solaris from your Windows machines. This limitation was existing in the old Oracle KM when doing remote monitoring. Of course, you can always create a request for enhancement to support other operating systems, and product management will consider it for future releases. In this moment, there is already some enhancements created, for example, to support the KM on Solaris. Also here, you can see the supported Java version. Performance and scalability data. Here, we can see some important information on performance and scalability data along with the minimum requirements. for customers to consider it and plan accordingly their environments. For example, there are good tips, like table spaces and custom queries consumes more memory and CPU, or how to isolate your environment depending on the size of the systems and number of table spaces. In this table, you can see some metrics, like how much memory and CPU the Java backend collector and patrol agent consumes depending on the load you are monitoring. This is a huge improvement comparing it against the old Oracle KM. The monitoring categories and user permissions is probably the most important page of the Oracle Enterprise KM documentation. As mentioned, it is up to the customers to create the monitoring user. So here, you can check which permissions are needed for each of the categories. You will want to share this information with your DBA to create the monitoring user and make sure all permissions are in place. As you can see, this is pretty clear and security-wise also a huge improvement. If you are in a high secure environment, you just can give the permissions for those categories you need to monitor. For example, if you don't need ASM or listeners, you don't have to give those permissions to the monitoring user. Of course, you will have to create your environment accordingly, and when configuring, select only those categories that you want to monitor to avoid alerts. The only grant that is required for the KM to work and that you must give is the create session. This is required for the KM to create the connection to the database using the JDBC connector. So if we compare this page with the old Oracle KM, you can see the huge improvement in the supportability and usability areas of the products. You can see here the permissions for the Patrol OS account user, which are no longer required in the new KM, and some other requirements which are gone. Here is the grants and privileges for the Patrol database account in the old Oracle KM. As you can see, there was the create privileges needed, and this was a security issue for many customers. As mentioned in the new KM, only create session is needed. And here, the patrol for Oracle database objects that are created in the user schema and that is gone in the new Oracle Enterprise KM. So let's get into the configuration. In the Oracle standalone database page, you can see the configuration fields and what are the details needed. Also, there is a short how-to video that you can come and watch every time you need. And here you can see the page where you can verify the configuration with the self-monitoring parameters we have covered in this webinar and we will see now in this demo. So let's move to the configuration policy. So here it is my TrueSight console, and where I have configured my Oracle Enterprise monitoring policy. Well, along you can see other policies as well for other KMs. As mentioned, the KM is fully supported for TrueSight. As a reminder, old Patrol consoles are not supported anymore. So of course I have created a package with the Oracle Enterprise KM and the Patrol agent. I have pushed it to the agent, and this is the way I have installed it. Then back to the policies. Let's check the policy I have created. Of course, like any policy, you put the name, description, you select the agent, and then you create the Oracle enterprise database monitoring solution configuration, just to show you what are the monitor types that are currently available in this KM. We have Oracle ESM, we have Oracle DataGuard, and RAC databases. But we will cover in this demo only the Oracle standalone database. You see here 1 and 2, latest version is 2.0, so it is always recommended to use the latest version. Let's check now my policy and my settings. As you can see, I've selected the monitor profile, Oracle environment monitoring, Oracle standalone, and this is the environment I have created. Let's have a look. Here you will see three frames. Something that you must understand is that environment settings, monitoring settings, those are the settings related to the environment. So everything that you apply here will be affecting or will be applied to all the standalone instances that you configure within this environment. So as we have mentioned, you put here the environment name and you create environments based on your monitoring needs. If you are here creating QA databases, production databases, or if you need to monitor pluggable databases or non-pluggable, you then create your environments based on the needs and the type of databases. So let's check on the environment settings. Basically, these will be the settings for the Java backend collector. As you can see here, as explained before, device mapping is enabled by default, and you should understand that when this is enabled, every Oracle instance that you configure here will appear as a single device in the device list with the name of the Oracle host. If you disable device mapping, everything will appear under the agent device. So when configuring the environment settings, you put the Java path. Here, in every field of the policy, you will see a tooltip. Some tooltips are nicer than others, but basically every field should have one. So you can see good information. As you can see here, you can enter the full path. In this case, this is my path. You can enter also $Java home. Then the KM will pick up the Java home environment variable set in the agent machine. Or you can leave this blank, and then the KM will pick up the patrol GRE installed in the patrol home directory. Of course, this is the Java installation in the agent machine. Here you can use Java OS credentials in case you don't want the Java process to be executed with the patrol default account. Otherwise, if you leave this blank, the KM will pick up the patrol agent default account to execute the Java process. Of course, you will need executable permissions. Here, you can set the collection poll intervals for the availability and data collection parameters. Availability parameters basically are the parameters that give you the status as the status of the instance, configuration status, all these type of parameters. Collection is 1 minute. The rest of parameters, called data performance parameters, are the ones that give you the rest of information, and the collection interval is 5 minutes. Long-running data collection queries means that you can set, let's say, like a kind of timeout or threshold for the queries that the KM executes to collect data. So in case there is a query that takes longer time to get executed, the KM will block that query to make sure the connection is not blocked and other queries will be able to get executed. So you will not see data gaps. You see only data gaps for the query that has an issue. If this happens, there is a long-running query parameter that will give you an annotation message saying which is the instance and the query affected, so you can take it with your DBA and take the necessary actions. So let's move to the monitoring categories. Here, as you can see, and we have mentioned already, very easy to configure. This is just a checkbox that you need to select for those categories that you want to monitor. In this case, I've selected these 3. Of course, you will select those categories that you have permission on the monitoring user. If there is any category that you know you don't want to monitor, and for any reason, mostly the security reasons, you did not give the permissions, you will not select it. Otherwise, you will get the alert. Also, if all these standalone instances that you configure here, for example, they are not pluggable, you will not select pluggable database. Otherwise, you will be alerted. So that's why you configure the environment based on the type of databases also. Here you can see that for some categories there are separated frames. That means that there are some settings that you can set for those categories. Like here, long-running job time and job over the time. In table spaces, you can do some filtering. In future releases, you may see for some of the categories also a separate frame if as soon as some new features will be available for them. Okay. So if we move to the standalone instance, here I have configured 2 instances, both with the same host, but one of them has some wrong information, just to show you the self-monitoring parameters. If we go to this one, which is the correct one, this is what we wanted to point out in this webinar. This is the basic configuration that you need to put here. Very easy, just the Oracle host. Also, you can see here the tooltip, Oracle port, Oracle connection method, and the connection name. You must understand that the connection method and the connection name, on even all the host and port, all this is set in the tnsnames.ora file in the Oracle server. For those of you that doesn't know, the tnsnames.ora file is used to map connection information for each Oracle service to a logical alias, and the Oracle JDBC driver uses this information to connect. So basically, you provide, or you ask your DBA to provide you these details and how the tnsnames.ora file is set, So they should be able to tell you if you need to use the service name or the SID name. For example, this is my how the tnsnames.ora file look like in my environment. Here you can see that I have set the service name, and this is the service name. So I have set the same in the Oracle connection method, and I have put the name here. Something important to note here is that this is a setting, connect assist DVA, that is available, but actually it's not recommended to use it, especially if you are monitoring production databases. Of course, this is for security reasons, but we have kept this because we know some customers will require to use a sys account or a sysdva account to monitor the databases. Mostly we recommend this only for tests and development environments. In this case, for this webinar, we have used the sys account. In case you use a DBA account, you must select this checkbox, otherwise the connection will not work. Here we have the custom SQL query. In the standalone configuration, SQL query is under each instance. This is not the same for Rack and DataGuard. So we're not going to go deep on this, but this is you mostly set the query name, the SQL query. You have some tips here as well. The collection time, and if you enable number of records annotation, you get that annotation message on the with the result of the query in the number of records parameter. So this is how the configuration looks like. Let's see now how the hierarchy tree looks. So here is the devices. As mentioned, device mapping is enabled, so the instances will appear under my host, Oracle host instance. Of course, if you have multiple instances configured with different hosts, you will see all the devices here. All the environment settings will appear under the agent device. We can have a look first. You see the Oracle root container, standalone. This is the Oracle environment container. And as you can see here, Oracle host, nothing under it, because you must go to the device. If we see here, this is what is available under the root container, attribute count, instance count, and the self-monitoring parameter configuration status. As mentioned, this attribute will be barely used as it's only for processing the CMA configuration internally. But still you get positive annotations. Let's see. Here we go. As you can see, the environment list, my standalone, added successfully. If we go to the environment container, you will see here configuration status and monitoring status, along other parameters. As mentioned, the configuration status will report any issue with the Java backend collector. In this case, our Java collector is working, so it's having OK, 0 OK. We may go and change it later, so you will see what is the notation here. If we go to the monitoring status, this reports the configurations errors that are impacting all the configured instances. So here, basically, this parameter is the cumulative of the instance status. So let's say if you have many instances configured, this will be very useful to check if there is any instance that has any issue. If we check for the annotations, we can see if we had an issue. Recently, there is one annotation. Also, there are positive message for this parameter. And here it says that Java collector process started. Let me check corrective monitoring status. Okay, and now we can see the annotation. As you can see here, there are some errors with the service and here as well. This is because I changed, I will show you now, I changed the service name. So this is to show you what type of error messages you get. You get the monitor instance and you get the error message. So you know which is the instance affected and you know what type of error you have, and probably you may find a way to correct it. In this case, I changed the seed, so I get this error. So let's go to the instance level. So we go to the host. As you can see now here, I cannot select the Oracle root, neither the Oracle environment. So we expand the Oracle host and we see this is the instance. You see the categories I selected and you see the table spaces here. For example, in this instance, Oracle 1, this instance doesn't exist in my tnsnames.ora file. So I have created with the same Oracle host, so it is under the same Oracle host. But the instance is not correct. So as you can see, instance status is reporting not okay. We should see the annotation measures and we can understand what is going on with this. So let's check it out. As you can see, TNS listener does not currently know of service requested in connect descriptor. Of course, as I said, if you go to the device, the policy, this is the instance I have created with a connection name that does not exist in the tnsnames.ora file. So I selected service, so it does report the correct error in the annotation of the instance status. So the instance status will report any problem related to the connection settings and the status of the instance. Of course, if any of the connection settings is wrong, as explained, the instance status or for the KM the instance is not available. Now, if we go again to the device, also we have the instance configuration status, which will report any permission error to monitor any of the selected categories. In this case, is 0 OK because all the categories are monitored correctly. But let's go to the policy again. Let's try to select, for example, something. Sorry, this will be under the environment. Again, categories is under the environment level and affecting all the instances. And let's select pluggable database and ASM. For example, click OK, save. And in theory, and now you can see how we got value 1 and the annotation message. So we can check what we got. And it says ASM was selected, but no ASMDs are available. So this is very clear message, and you understand that there is no ASMDs on this instance, and you should not select ASM category. So let's check again the configuration status attribute. That it is probably one of the most important, as will give you the status of the Java backend collector. As we saw before, it is under the environment level because it is affecting all the instances. Currently, configuration status showing OK, and with the positive messages saying that Java collector process started successfully. Let's change the Java path. Let's put a ground Java path, and let's see what we get. Go to environment settings. So we put something ground here. We should see configuration status with value 1 now. We got it now with 1. View annotation, and here it is the error that the Java path is not valid. Very useful, and for any problem with the Java process, you will get it annotated, or you will get a meaningful error in the annotation message. Last, I want to show you a couple of things. If you want to do a local monitoring, of course, as mentioned many times in this webinar, we recommend remote monitoring. This KM was designed for remote monitoring, but of course, if you install the KM and the Patrol agent and the Oracle server, you can perform local monitoring, but from the KM perspective, basically local and remote is the same, as you use the same connection details, and you will use also the JDBC even if it is local. But you may want to use, when configuring the instance, you can use the host name, $hostname, to configure your Oracle databases. That will be the only difference. Also, if you want to enable a debug, you have two places. Here it will be for the Java backend collector debug. Just to enable it, click on the checkbox. And also for the PSL debug, you enable it here. Very easy, and you go to these locations, also explained in the documentation very clearly where to get the created debug files. So if still, after checking the self-monitoring parameters, you cannot solve an issue, you can enable debug, collect these logs, and contact BMC customer support. Here, some references and links basically to documentation pages that we have covered. This is the main documentation page, verifying the configuration, where you can get the self-monitoring attributes information in case you need to verify something. Also, the most important page in this KM, the monitoring categories and the using permissions that you need to check and provide to your DBAs to create the monitoring user. Also, we have in communities a blog where you can consult, put your questions, and other community members, also support personnel, will try to answer any question or doubts. In summary, we have covered what are the advantages and benefits of the new Oracle Enterprise KM, especially if you compare it with the old Oracle KM solution. This new KM is aligned with today's modern technology, using certified Oracle JDBC connector, is using the minimal required permissions for minimal security risks. And we saw some of the scalability metrics and how, using the remote monitoring, you basically can monitor all your remote databases with very basic configuration details, easy to maintain. And also we cover how you can self-troubleshoot any issue with the new self-monitoring attributes that this KM provides. Here concludes my demo. I hope you like and you found it useful. Over to you, Greg.
Thank you, Manuel. I will take us through the closing with the self-help and contacting BMC, the YouTube channel where this webinar will be posted a week from today's live presentation, along with a rich set of how-to videos are available. The Connect with TrueSight webinar schedule that includes future webinars as well as past webinar recordings is available there. And to contact technical support via web, phone, email, as well as these social channels. Want to thank you for joining this month's webinar, and we'll see you next month.